Welcome everyone to our Religious Freedom Forum. My name is Joshua and I'll be your moderator for the night. And now you all probably know why we're here. We're here against the long march, we're here for the long march against institutions and to fight for our religious freedoms. So today, in collaboration with the Maquarie Liberal Club, we have three great speakers here. Each will be speaking on a different aspect of religious freedom to help us understand the issue more. So the way tonight will go, each speaker will have 15 minutes. First we'll have Riccardo Bosi, who will talk on the cultural importance of religious freedom. Then we will have Dr. Con, who's been spearheading a Christian alliance with different faiths for the religious freedom push at the federal level. And then we'll hear from Mark about his religious freedom bill being pushed at the state level. And after that, we'll have a Q&A. So if any of you have questions about this subject, let's give a round of applause.
Okay, back in the university, that's interesting. I've been here for quite a while.
We want more of your beautiful face.
Oh, thank you. Fantastic. Okay, well, what I'm going to do, because Rick is Rick and Mark, well, you'll get to see what Mark is like very shortly. I like to have things a bit more structured and a bit more ordered. Okay, that's just the way I am. So I'm going to, my talk is here broken up into three sections. Firstly, I'm going to give you the historical context as to how do we get here. Then we'll talk about some fundamentals in terms of why religious freedom as an idea is so important. I mean, Rick has covered things from a broad brush perspective. I'm going to zero in a little bit more. Then we'll talk about the political environment, okay, at a federal level. And then I'll hand over to our esteemed member of the Legislative Council over here to talk about what's happening at a state level. So where we are, I mean, everybody knows that religious freedom is an issue in the media, and it was an issue in the recent federal election. But it's actually been brewing for several years. See, this actually started back in 2017 with the legalisation of same-sex marriage. Now, at that time, okay, everybody was warned that if you're going to legalise same-sex marriage, you would need to have adequate protections for religious freedom. Whether I might use this, that's right, I'll use this. Because now, whether you voted for same-sex marriage or you didn't is not really relevant. The bottom line is that 5 million Australians voted no, okay? And they voted no on religious grounds, and most of them in ALP seats or marginal seats. So only a fool would think that you could totally ignore the concerns of 5 million people and that there wouldn't be consequences. Okay, and both major parties were warned. Listen, this is a problem, and you need to actually do something about protecting this before you rush ahead. But unfortunately, both parties chose to ignore those warnings, and the legislation was rushed through, and the beliefs of those peoples were basically ignored. Okay. Then we had the Ruddock Report. Okay, that was done over the summer of 2018. It was given to the federal government, then led by Malcolm Turnbull in May. What it actually showed was that there really were holes in our religious freedom. Okay, there were a lot of assumptions, but we really didn't have robust protection, and it made 20 recommendations that I won't go through in great detail to address these issues. Now, the problem was that the Libs actually sat on it. So they got the report in May, but they did nothing. We didn't hear it. Okay, everyone's asking, where is this report? Where is this report? They sit on it. It gets leaked just before the Wentworth by-election, okay, to cause the government some problems. And, did we get, and I'm going to paraphrase and quote Mark Latham here, did we get a debate on religious freedom after the Ruddock Report? No, we got another debate on gay rights. Okay, what actually happened was that Labor then started arguing that religious schools wanted to expel gay and lesbian students. Now, there was actually no evidence that was actually happening, but that didn't stop them from making the claim, and it got a lot of hoopla in the media. And does anyone remember the Penny Wong bill? Yep. Okay, well, that was the upshot of all that. And that was a terrible bill. Okay, they said it was only about students, but when you actually read the bill, it went way beyond students, it went way beyond schools. It would have affected synagogues, it would have affected churches, it would have affected mosques, it would have affected a home Bible study, okay? Because the language of the bill was so wide-ranging. Thankfully, the bill was defeated, but what ended up happening is it raised everybody's eyebrows and it raised our antenna that this was a real issue and that something was coming. Then, approximately April of this year, we had the Israel Folau issue started in April of last year, but when he then made another comment in sort of March, April of this year, and of course he was sacked for quoting 1 Corinthians 6, 9, 10 and 11. Okay, so all he did was paraphrase those scriptures. Okay, it's not he didn't say gay's bad. He didn't say this. He didn't say I hate gay people. He basically quoted what the biggest selling book of all time, the Holy Bible, okay, said. And for that, he was sacked. That was a big wake-up call for a lot of people, because a lot of people were wondering, gee, is that going to happen to me? Am I going to be the next Israel Folau? Okay, that's the sort of question that was being asked at the grassroots level. Then Labor lose the unlosable election. I mean, all the polls were saying, it was almost like the 2016 presidential election, wasn't it? Shorten was a shoo-in to win. I even heard that he'd actually packed up his stuff from his home in Maribyrnong, okay, to move into the lodge, right? That's how sure they were of winning the election. Well, they lost it. And it was, and one of the key issues that the media don't like to talk about, some media do, was the religious freedom. Because you had seats like McMahon, where I was working in Chifley, have big swings against the Labor Party, okay, up to 8%. And those swings, some of them, went to parties like One Nation. Now this is interesting, and the ABC did a story on this over the weekend. You got migrants in Fairfield and Mount Druitt voting for a party whose leader said 30 years ago that we're in danger of being swamped by Asians. And then a couple of decades ago, she said we're in danger of being swamped by Muslims, right? Now, put aside whether you agree with what she said, okay? Migrants voted for her. They voted for One Nation. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because they thought that, well, this woman and her party will do a better job of protecting our religious freedom than either of the majors. Okay, so, and I can tell you, having worked in those electorates and working with people, that was a big factor in the shift of those votes. And I'll tell you what a lot of people in the Middle East tell me. Okay, they told me that, you know what, we left that country because we were persecuted by the sword. We've now come here and now we're persecuted by the law. Okay, so we've gone from warfare to lawfare. Okay, so then we had the Morrison government then saying we'll give you a religious discrimination act. We'll give you that act and we'll look after it. And they've since released an exposure draft of that religious discrimination act, and I actually have it in that bag over there. It's a wonderful piece of sort of pseudo legislation that I'll talk about a bit later. Now, having set that political scene, that political context, I want to talk about some, fundamentals of why it's a real problem. Okay? Now, firstly, we talk about religious freedom. Okay, Riccardo's defined religion. I want to talk about freedom now. Okay, what is true freedom? Well, you can't have real freedom unless you have freedom of action, correct? Okay, but your actions come from your thoughts, so you have to have freedom of thought. And your thoughts come from your beliefs. So therefore, without freedom of belief, you actually don't have freedom. Now, your belief could be, I have no belief, I'm an atheist, that's fine. But you have to be free to hold that belief. Just like the theist has to be free to hold their belief, or the Muslim has to be free to hold their belief, or you want to believe in the flying spaghetti monster, that's fine. You've got to be free to hold that belief. All right? Now, then let's talk about some fundamentals of identity, because, okay, anyone here ever heard the term identity politics?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. Okay, your identity. It's all about identity and inclusion, isn't it? Isn't that right? So, isn't that what universities are about? Identity and inclusion? Okay, well, for a religious person, their religious beliefs define who they are. That's their identity. Okay, so if you're going to be inclusive about identity, you have to include people of religious belief. And you have to accept their religious belief. Otherwise, you're not including them. Now, all of this leads to a fundamental conflict. Okay, so actually, now let me backtrack. I also want to talk about rights, some fundamentals of rights. There are two kinds of rights, basically. You've got positive rights and negative rights. Okay? A positive right defines what you can do. All right? It says you can do this or you can do that. A negative right talks about what can be done to you. And anti-discrimination laws are an example of negative rights. They talk about what can't be done to you. And there are certain exemptions in those laws that sort of define, that say what you can do. The same-sex marriage law was an example of a positive right. It gave same-sex couples the positive right to marry. Does everyone follow the difference? Now, the problem is positive rights usually trump negative rights in any court battle. It's like any conflict. Who wins a fight? Usually, a war. Riccardo, correct? The person with the biggest gun, usually. Okay? Bigger gun, usually better than a smaller gun. Correct? So, we now have a fundamental conflict because the federal government has given the positive right to one group of people to practice something that the Holy Scriptures of the two biggest religions in the world, that is Islam and Christianity, call an abomination. Okay? Now, you can throw rocks at me for saying that if you want to, but that's what the Bible says homosexuality is, and that's what the Quran says it is. Whether you agree with those scriptures or not is not relevant. That's what they say. Okay? So you've got, because everyone see the problem we've got? This group has the positive right to do something that this group, their scriptures say is abhorrent. That's a recipe for trouble. Okay? If I've ever seen one. Now, I know that there might be some, you might say, oh yeah, aren't there scholars that say that the Bible doesn't condemn homosexuality? No, they're in the minority. None of the serious Christian or Muslim scholars will say anything other than, I'm sorry, but the Quran and the Bible do not support it. And so, whether you agree with those scriptures or not, those scriptures define the identity for many practicing Christians, Jews and Muslims. Okay? And collectively, there are about 3 billion people around the world. Okay? So, you have to take that into account, unfortunately. And if 70% of Australia is still religious, according to the census, okay, and 50% of the country is still Christian, according to the census, you're going to ignore the rights and the identity of half the country. You're asking for trouble. Now, why I give you that is hopefully you don't see any surprise then as to why so many Christians and Muslims actually funded Israel Folau's fees. I know that one Shia community in Sydney, they gave $80,000 to his campaign. Why is that? Because they see that they could be, that there, but for the grace of whoever they believe in, could be them. Does everyone follow that? So now let's talk about some fundamental politics. Basically, the government doesn't want a long drawn-out debate. They want this issue to go away. Okay, they want it off the agenda as quick as possible. They want bipartisan support, but there's a fundamental problem now because both parties can't satisfy the LGBT lobby and the religious lobby at the same time. Because when you've got demands that are mutually exclusive, do everyone know what I mean by that term? Mutually exclusive. One wants black, one wants white. The guy who wants black doesn't want white. The guy who wants white doesn't want black. You can't give them grey because they want black and they want white. You follow? So basically what MPs now, what they have is they've got in one ear, they've got religious groups yelling that they want religious freedoms laws to give them greater protection. And in the other ear, they've got the gay lobby telling them that, no, we don't want to give them those laws. All right? So that puts them, and because it's about religious freedom, I'm going to quote a few texts here. If you indulge that. Jesus actually said in one of the Gospels, Gospel of Luke, he said, no servant can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. So, we've now got a far more complicated problem for the government to solve. So instead of fixing this 2 years ago, when they should have, that we now have to try and unscramble the egg. And I'm going to give you a fact that I know that in the last couple of weeks, both Sunni and Shia, because I'm working closely with those communities, have had meetings with the opposition, okay, the Labor Party. And I'll paraphrase. This is what they said to senior members of the Labor Party. So, when I tell you this, this should be like a, wow, Muslim people are saying this to Labor. You guys, what was said is, oh, Labor is the party for your community. Their response was, you care more about gays and lesbians than you do about our community. Okay? You're going to have to choose. Either you're going to look after our community or you're going to look after them, but you can't do both. So, yeah, well, that's it. You know, one of the reasons I really do like my Islamic brothers is they're hardcore, and because why should you be wishy-washy? I mean, correct? You know, we all should be hardcore about what we believe. Why be wishy-washy? We're in this mess because everybody's wishy-washy. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is get you to be hardcore about your beliefs, whatever they are. You don't have to believe what I believe, but believe something, for crying out loud. Okay? So, got to be carried away. So now what that's led to is that both parties are now between a rock and a hard place. And I'll quote my esteemed co-speaker. Riccardo called it in our phone conversation a week ago. He said, "That's a big wedge." I said, "Yes, it is. They've got the big wedge." Now, the federal bill, okay, we talked about that exposure draft. Okay, I've actually done a pretty detailed analysis of it, and if anybody wants it later, I can give it to you. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to have a bet each way. Okay, a bit of this and a bit of that. They're trying to give something to either side, hoping, you know, give this dog a bone, give this dog a bone, and hopefully both dogs will shut up. Right? It's not going to work. Because there are a number of problems with the bill. Number one, it's not clear. It doesn't define key terms. It says lawful religious activity, but it doesn't say what's lawful. It doesn't say what religious activity is, and it doesn't define terms like vilify. Okay, it's like, for example, lawful. What if the council makes a bylaw that says you can't pray in this area? Then that's unlawful. Then, according to that bill. Right? It doesn't define what's unjustifiable financial hardship. So that's a big problem. It's not consistent. It actually says that if your employer earns more than $50 million, you get one level of protection, and if they earn less than $50 million, you get another level of protection. So how does that work? Why should your freedom or your protections be dependent on what your employer earns? Okay? It doesn't override state laws. It says that, you know, conscientious objectors have, this is what you can do if there's no state law, but if there's a state law, then that state law applies. And so I'm glad I don't practice in Victoria, because in Victoria, if someone came to me and they wanted an abortion, right, and I said, no, I'm not going to give you that, I'm legally required to refer them, even if I don't believe in it. And there's a doctor named Andrew Hobart who said he wouldn't do that, and he's been before their tribunals and authorities because of that. Okay, it's not complete. It doesn't cover things like nursing homes. It doesn't cover conscientious objections. It doesn't cover parental rights. It doesn't talk about parents who want to withdraw their children from safe schools type material. So it doesn't cover any of that. Okay, so it needs a whole lot of work, and I'm submitting that we need to take our time. Okay, we need to not rush this, because that's what got us into this mess. And anybody that's here has the opportunity to talk to a federal member, government or opposition, or in the Senate, you need to tell them, slow down. Slow down. They want to rush this through by the end of the year. We don't want that. Okay, it's too important, as Riccardo said. It's far too important to rush. So what's needed? I'll finish on this. We need a real solution. We need to do a number of things. We need to get back to the basics of a civil society and recognise that it's okay to have a healthy disagreement. Okay? It's okay for me to say, look, you're wrong, and not have your feelings hurt. Okay? We need to avoid creating a society of snowflakes. I mean, okay? We need to recognise what is and is not discrimination. Okay? It's not discrimination for me to verbalise what my scriptures say. Okay? You can disagree with them, but I'm not discriminating against you. I'm not treating you any differently by saying that. So that's actually one of the good things that's in this exposure draft. It actually makes that statement. That statements of belief are not, discrimination. So, credit where credit's due. We need to recognise that while all individuals have equal value as human beings, not all ideas are equally valuable. Okay? Some ideas are fallacious, and some ideas are just stupid. Okay? And we need the freedom to call those ideas out without being dragged to courts or tribunals. All right? Now, while we should do our best to neither give nor take offence, we need to get rid of the idea that we have a right to not be offended or insulted. I mean, I'm sorry, but life is just not fair. Okay? Like Malcolm Fraser said, life wasn't meant to be easy. You are going to get insulted and you are going to get offended. And you've unfortunately got to learn to gut it up and just not let that get to you. You know, we need to help our young people especially not think about safe spaces. I mean, seriously? I mean, you know, when I was at university, it was like you could have arguments and all that, and we could have, you know, debates and I grew up in Punch Bowl, and I'd argue with the Muslims all the time, right? You know, we need to get back to that kind of society. We need to recognise that religious people need positive rights to live out their identity as religious people, and I guess we need to bring back some balance to the discussion. So religious people, like myself, need to recognise and accept when the government has legislated things that our scriptures call sinful, like same-sex marriage. Okay, I don't agree with it, but I accept it. I need to accept it. I need to not jump up and down and say this is wrong. Well, it's done. Okay, I don't agree with it, but the government's legalised it, so we need to live and let live. In the same way, non-religious Australians, including the LGBT lobby, need to recognise and accept my freedom as a religious person or any other religious person to say that their scriptures recognise these practices as sinful, even if they don't agree with those scriptures. You see that? That's the balance. I don't agree with you, but you accept my right to have my views. You don't agree with me, but I accept your right to have your views. That's the balance. We need to get back to simple common sense to be able to being able to have robust discussions without shouting each other down, shutting each other down, or deplatforming us. Okay? I should be able to go and say this sort of stuff at any university without being deplatformed. Okay? So should Mark, so should Rick. And I guess we need to get back to simple, basic respect. We need to respect each other's rights to hold views, even if they're different to our own, and even if we disagree with them. I'm going to finish by saying we need to get back to what Jesus told us in Matthew 7. Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. Thank you very much.
Could you all imagine if we had this event at USyd? That would be crazy, wouldn't it? We had a protest at 12 noon today. The protesters wrote in chalk, there's a protest at 10 minutes before the protest. And so you got a turnout of like 10 people. So thank you for that, Dr. Cotton.